Yes, Dr. Craig. I would like to first ask, as a setup, was the audience of Matthew Jewish, and was its author Jewish?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Whether it seems to be that would be a Jewish gospel emphasizing Jesus as king, for example. Yeah.
Then why in the story of the guards does it say, this is verse 15 of the last chapter of Matthew, and they, having received the money, did as they were taught, and the account was spread abroad amongst Jews until this day. And why is it that if it says specifically until this day, indicating a long time for this with a nebulous beginning in the past, is this absolutely stated as proof that there was a empty tomb that needed to be explained, since it could have just popped up later when the Jews just wanted to, the Orthodox Jews just wanted to get rid of the Christian sect.
Well, now, if you mean that a Jew could not have referred to his fellow Jews by saying this has been spread among Jews until this day, that's not a good argument, because John's gospel is very Jewish, and yet it polemicizes all the time against the Jews. So
its target was Gentiles, I think.
Well, but I mean, it's a Jewish gospel, and so I don't see why Matthew couldn't use that expression to say this has been spread among Jews until this day. And what you have in Matthew, I think, that's so interesting is you have, as you say, the tail end of what looks to be a very long controversy. The original proclamation of the disciples in Jerusalem was probably, "He is risen from the dead." Now, what did the Jewish leadership respond to that? The response was to say, the disciples stole away his body. Then the Christian response to that was, no, the guard would have prevented any such theft. To which the Jewish response then was, well, the guard fell asleep. And then the Christian response to that was, no, the Jewish leadership bribed the guard to say this. So what you see here is the tail end of a long controversy that goes back to, I think, the earliest days in Jerusalem of Jewish Christians and non-Christians interacting with each other over what happened to the body of Jesus. And the non-Matthean vocabulary that's in this narrative would just be confirmatory of that long tradition that I think suggests that we have good grounds here for thinking this is not a late tradition, but rather a very early tradition that supports the historicity of the empty tomb.
Thank you.
Go to the side.
Hi. You said that there isn't enough sufficient evidence. However, you follow by showing that there was historical evidence as well as evidence of eyewitness testimonies. You then said that you don't believe the Gospels because they're mythological, and the epistles then speak of Jesus rising from the dead. It seems as if there is sufficient evidence. You just don't believe it to be so. Ironically enough, you said that we could read your books to be informed about the topic. So what exactly is sufficient evidence to you?
You mean what hypothetically would have been sufficient evidence?
Yeah, like what do you think is sufficient
yeah, I mean,
evidence?
there are probably 100 examples I could give that would all be sufficient for me. I'll just give you one example for that. If Jesus had risen from the dead and appeared to everyone in the world so that we had simultaneous documentation in China, India, Babylon, Rome, and so forth, that he actually did this, which we would have. I mean, if we had, for example, Mark says the whole world was covered in darkness, had that actually happened for 3 hours during a new moon, for example, this would be widely documented by astronomers and historians throughout the world, and we would be able to corroborate it from independent traditions, and we could actually confirm, regardless of what we believe the cause of that darkness was, we could actually confirm historically that it had occurred, whatever its explanation was. The same thing could have happened for the resurrection of Jesus if he'd appeared to people and explained, you know, this is who I am, I have risen from the dead, here is my message to you. And we had this independently corroborated worldwide, even especially in cultures where you wouldn't expect this to occur. That, to me, would convince me that something had happened, that this Jesus character had risen from the dead in some sense, whatever I then concluded the cause of that was. I would find that sufficient historical evidence, at least of the fact, regardless of the theology behind it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Craig. Thanks again for your presentation. And my question is going to play off of Dr. Carrier's response over there. He keeps hitting at this point that Jesus appearing to the whole world, you know, if he really resurrected from the dead. First of all, you're a Christian. Has Jesus appeared to you?
No.
Okay. Now, how do you respond to that statement that Jesus has to appear to everyone? And secondly, what relevance does that have to do with the discussion of the historicity of the resurrection?
Well, it has no relevance, and it's really surprising to see this philosophical intrusion into what's supposed to be a historical discussion. A person could be a universalist. He could think that everyone is going to be saved, whether he believes in Jesus Christ or not, that the benefits of Christ's atoning death are applied to every person in the world. Whether you're a universalist, an inclusivist, an exclusivist, just has nothing to do with the historicity of the resurrection. That has to do with your theology. I'm of the persuasion that God does want all persons to be saved, to come to a knowledge of himself, and therefore that he orders the world in such a way that he places people at times and places in history where he knows that they will have opportunity to come to him and to believe in him and to be saved, and that there will be no one who will be lost because of the accidents of history or geography. That anybody who wants to be saved or even would want to be saved will be born at a time and place in history where he has adequate evidence and opportunity to be saved. Now that's a theological conviction, and it's unrelated to the historicity of the empty tomb and things of that sort. So this just shouldn't play any role in the debate tonight. This is a question for theology or philosophy, not for the historicity of the Gospels.
Thank you.
Quickly, my question has two parts. First part being, would you agree that when you are writing a document or a debate, that citing multiple types of sources is really important to the authenticity of a document in and of itself? And the second question being, partly a statement, partly a question. You said in multiple rebuttals throughout your debate towards Dr. Craig that there were numerous scholars that did not believe in the empty tomb and other such statements that Dr. Craig made. How come you did not state why did you not make multiple cites towards those statements, and most of your citings being from your own books, when the mark of a good writer or debater is to make multiple cites supporting his theory, none of which are his own?
Okay, I'll take the second question. I'll need to ask you about the first one because I didn't understand it. The second question, I cited that article by Gary Habermas in the Journal for the Study of the Historical Jesus, June 2005. He actually identifies 13 scholars who, by name, actually don't believe in the resurrection, or argue against the empty tomb. I personally have spoken to a large number of scholars who have expressed to me their agnosticism on the point, and Habermas didn't even look for agnostics or count them. So even just as a matter of statistical fact, according to Habermas's data, we're looking at least a quarter of all scholars that have specifically argued on this subject have taken the position that I have taken in the past, and in this case as a possible position. But so already he's talking about 13 or 14 of them. If you were to add the agnostics in, because he's only measuring the pros and the cons, if you add the agnostics into the equation, the percentage goes up. It has to, mathematically necessarily has to go above a quarter. So if you assume that there's a quarter also are agnostics, which I think is a more than reasonable assumption, we're looking at a 50-50 split. Now Habermas's database was also based on, he didn't single out actual qualified experts in ancient documents and history. He counted everybody. So he included philosophers, for example, who didn't have any specific skills in this particular area. If you exclude them and only look at qualified experts, the data the percentages might change even again. And then, of course, another point I would like to make is that I didn't have time to in the debate, which is that Habermas makes the point that most of those who argue for the empty tomb do so on the basis that they believe that women's testimony wasn't accepted in the ancient world. So most of those people who are in that 75% of the ones that he counted are actually using an uninformed conclusion on that point. So I think once you eliminate that, then the percentage goes way above 50%. Now we're flipping the odds in the other direction, really, because then you might have changing a lot of minds in that case. Why I didn't cite them, I could have. I just mentioned the Habermas article as the sort of sweeping example of that. Now that's the second question. With regard to the first question, I didn't understand it. Could you maybe re-explain?
Basically, it
Or
was...
was that just a prelude to the second question?
It was a prelude, like a segue into the second question.
Interpreting your first question in light of your second question, what you're talking about is naming actual scholars who advocate a position currently right now. In that respect, I think one has to take into account, do you trust the biases in that particular area, and does the scholar have the relevant experience, and has he looked at the relevant evidence, and is he basing his conclusion on the correct arguments? And that's, I've just explained that to you with regard to the Habermas example of his database of these scholars in this point, where you have to approach that issue critically. So I don't know if that answered your question, but...
In part, yes.
Okay, I hope, yeah, all right.